You can either grow or you can be comfortable, but it very rarely do both happen simultaneously. And that hit me like a ton of bricks.
Hi everyone, it's Alyssa Gonzalez, back with another episode of Songwriter Saturday. Today I chatted with Thomas Rhett. He's a Grammy-nominated songwriter, producer, and an artist in his own right. We dove into his collaborations with Jason Aldean and Lady A. We also discussed his musical influences, his journey as an artist, being a father to 4 girls, and the songwriting culture within Nashville. Here's our chat. Thanks for coming on Songwriter Saturday. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you very much.
I noticed that you said in an interview recently that you didn't really see yourself going down the music path like your dad. How did you end up going into writing music?
Ultimately, I think my path was music, but I've always been a pretty rebellious kid. Like I never broke rules to the point of like, I'm going to go to jail, but I always like tried to push boundaries to the point of, I want you to know that I'm like not following your rule, And so I think a lot of that mentality went into not necessarily rebellion against music, but it was just kind of like, know what, that's what dad does. I want to go do something completely opposite, make my own name for myself. I probably would have sold real estate more than likely. I think that's what the majority of my friends went on and did and still are doing now. I started begging my dad to just allow me to, I didn't even want to write. I just wanted to watch him do what he did with his friends. And every now and then I would say a line and my dad would be like, hey, that's like that's pretty good, And he was just like, how do you feel like you know how to do this? I was like, well, technically I've been soaking it in from you for 20 years, whether it was subconscious or conscious, but I got asked to play a show with my cover band to open for a guy in Nashville. And there was a guy named Ben Vaughn there who ran EMI Publishing at the time. And he asked my dad, he was like, do you think TR would like to try writing for a living? And my dad was like, maybe, And so he offered me a developmental publishing deal, meaning we're going to see how you do for like 8 months. And then we'll probably drop you unless you do something that's like kind of cool. And so at that point, I started writing and I started to find my own niche group in Nashville of other songwriters that really didn't know what they were doing. They just knew that they loved to write and make words rhyme. And, it was about a year into that deal that I wrote a song called I Ain't Ready to Quit that my friend Jason Aldean recorded on his My Kind of Party album. And to this day, it was like that defining moment in my life. It was like I needed something like that to happen for me to be like, okay, I think this is the path. And I'll never forget it. I was still in college. And all my buddies drove to Target and we bought like 6 copies of that album and threw a party that night and only played the song that I had on
Yes.
on Jason's record. I just loved that feeling.
Yeah, for sure. You once said, just because I don't have a fiddle on my song doesn't mean I'm not a country singer. What aspects of a song make it country? Is it the honest narratives? Is it the melodies? Like, what to you makes up a country song?
So I think when people go, what is country to me? They relate it to what they grew up on. At least that's my opinion, right? So when I listen to country music today, I go, yeah, it's not traditional, but my version of traditional is 90s because that's what I grew up listening to. But when 90s country was happening, you had 30, 40-year-old people going, that ain't country because it doesn't sound like Merle and Waylon. But then if you went back to the 70s, those people were going, Merle and Waylon are outlaws. They were called outlaws for a reason. And it was because they were breaking the rules of a genre. And in 20 years, it'll sound so much different. And this will be referred to by kids my age as that's traditional country. And so it's like, I think it's always funny to answer that question because I think country is ever changing. But I think the bottom definition of is it authentic and does it tell an honest story and does it tell it from an honest perspective? I think whatever's happening in the production element, as long as that is happening, I would say that is at the root what country music is.
I think one relationship that you have in country is with Florida Georgia Line. I just love to hear more about your guys' collaboration process. You guys have been on tour together.
FGL kind of popped onto the scene when I think it was like my first or second single that I had come out with, and my first 2 singles did not do very well. And I remember when FGL popped on the scene, not only did they put out a smash hit, but they put out a song that will forever be remembered as a moment when country music changed. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, everybody wanted to know who was producing FGL, who were they writing with, how did they just have one single and all of a sudden they're selling out arenas and breaking beer sale records and headlining stadiums? It was just like, it didn't make sense in anybody's brain, because we were all still floating on this tail end wave of like Luke Bryan popping off and Jason Aldean popping off and all this stuff. So we're all trying to like, well, how do we copy that? You know what I mean? Like, how do we do this? And then all of a sudden FGL pops on and you're like, well, how do we do that? Like, how do we do this? And I remember meeting, Tyler and Brian backstage at one of their concerts in New York. This was like right when Cruise had come out. And, I'm sitting there putting 40 people in a bar, and they just sold out this place that had 10,000 people at it. And I think our relationship started with me going, hey, how honestly asking for advice. You know what I'm saying? And they took me under their wing in a way that not a lot of people did. You know what I mean? Like I'd gotten advice from a lot of people, but it was that night where I was like, man, we should tour together one day. And it was the next year that they brought me on tour with them. And I remember I'd go to the soundboard every single night. I'd watch every single FGL show. I'd watch every single pyro hit, cryo hit. I would study the video content on the wall. I would study how good their vocal sounds, how their kick drum sounds that way. And all of a sudden, it just turned into this like really organic friendship that has lasted basically a decade now. And we've gotten to do a lot of really fun stuff together. And I feel like those guys really taught me a lot about entertaining, writing songs, production. I think just from getting to study them, just from being on the road with them for that long.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many writers, grinding out in Nashville right now. What's your advice to them to stand out?
I think as a new artist, trust your gut for sure, but never repel the people that are speaking truth about a song. Does that make sense? I think being able to take criticism from someone that you trust may be the most important part of making it as a songwriter. Because you could have had a couple giant hits, therefore you think you might be bulletproof, and you might be, I only write great songs, and it's just not the truth. None of us only write great songs. But I do think as a professional songwriter, you do get to a point where I don't think any of your songs are bad, but it turns into like, which one of the ones that are good are fantastic. You know what I mean? And those are the ones that end up, you keep pinpointing in your career. So I think what I would say to a young artist is like, don't be afraid to take criticism from the people that you trust. Because I do think they only have the best interest in your heart. And I feel like I am where I am because I got to learn from my failure and learn through that trial and error. And if someone said, hey man, this is good, but I think you have better inside of you, don't get mad at that statement. Put your head down and keep going. And so I think that would be the best bit of advice I could give someone.
I love the song Friends Don't Let Friends Drink Alone. How did that song come about, and what's your relationship like with Lady A?
It was a song, Friends Don't Let Friends Drink Alone was started down at the beach. And I was down there, Julian Bonetta was down there, Charles Kelly was down there. And I remember I'd had this title for a while, and all of our kids were like playing soccer in this like big green area, while the adults, at 9:30 in the morning, Charles was like, anybody want a beer? And I was like, it reminded me of like, yeah, I'm not going to let you do this alone, and yes, I do. I would love a beer. And we started writing that over at Julian's spot, Jesse Frazier's spot. And the next thing you know, Charles was like, I just feel like Lady A hasn't done something like this ever. And they wanted to record it, and it was one of those things that, man, I've known the folks in Lady A for so long, and they've always been some of the most kind-hearted people to me. Have always supported me in my career. They've always been there for me. I hope I can always be there for them when they need me. But this song was kind of like one of those long time coming type of things. It's like me and Charles have been buddies for so long. It's like, how have we never done a song together? And to me, still to this day, one of the most talented groups in the world, most beautiful harmonies on the planet, and people that I think will be doing this as long as they feel like they want to. Watching
your dad, rather than like working side by side, what's one thing you've taken from that?
I've learned so much from him, but I think one of the biggest is just work ethic. My dad will go through these weeks and periods of his life where he's just like, I'm quitting. I quit writing songs. I can't write any good songs ever again. And then the next week he gets like a Luke Combs cut. It's like, He's like, he has this like weirdly like pessimistic, but also super positive attitude about the way that he writes songs. And so you can always count on him to show up. And I think I just learned how to continue to show up from him. You know what I mean? Like you could do a string of shows that were just not your best effort, but that doesn't mean you get to just lay down and quit for next weekend. That means you got to like pick yourself up and go do it better next weekend. And my dad is just always like, there's always another song to be written, and you never know if that next one is the one that changes your life, you know? So I feel like hard work and just showing up are two huge qualities and attributes that I learned from him.
Yeah, I think definitely in a creative space, right? We all have those moments where we're like, oh, I quit. I hate everything I'm doing. Everything I'm listening to and watching is a nightmare. If you ever get into those headspaces, it's almost kind of like an imposter syndrome. How do you combat that? Like, how do you get your head out of that space?
I heard a quote the other day from my preacher at church, and he said, you can either grow or you can be comfortable, but it very rarely do both happen simultaneously. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because so many times in my life when I have been comfortable, whether it's writing or my marriage or parenting, there's never any growth from being comfortable. But those times where I've like gone a different direction musically or tried to write songs that weren't what the norm of me came from, it was a super uncomfortable position, but what was happening was growth. Because even in those like really challenging situations, those days where you want to quit but you don't, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be glad that you didn't quit, because you're going to look back a year later and be like, man, I grew this year. Like I learned a lot about playing a show, writing a song, being a better dad, being a better parent. Like I think that it takes those periods of uncomfortability to be able to look back and be like, man, I really learned a lot through that season of quote unquote uncomfortableness.
What surprised you the most about the creation of your album while you were creating it?
I think the thing that surprised me the most about this album was that it actually turned into an album. Because this album was super unplanned. I thought in my head I was recording for Country Again Side B. I thought everything I had written up to this point was for Country Again Side B. And once I got back on the road and I started playing in front of real people for the first time in a year and a half, there was something in my brain that was like, dang, I think a lot of people have forgotten a lot about themselves, but they did not forget how to have fun, and they did not forget how to have a good time. I just think we all needed some reminding of what a good time looked like after the couple years we just had. And I just wasn't prepared for Side B to be what I wanted to take into a summer tour this year. And so I started writing a song, and then a song turned into 10, and 10 turned into 50. And the next thing you know, this collection that we had whittled down did not feel like what I wanted Side B to feel like. So in many ways, the surprise was that a whole other album was birthed out of something that I thought was going to be something different.
Yeah, for sure. I really would like to know if you could go back and give yourself, way back to the beginning, one piece of advice for songwriting, but also in your artistry, what would it be?
I mean, I think it kind of goes along with a lot of the things I've been saying today, but I just think failure is so important. And I know that sounds weird to say, but I think if I could go back and talk to 21-year-old me, just signed a record deal, you know, just putting out your first single, I'd be like, hey man, I need you to embrace the failure that is about to happen. And don't let that failure become your identity, because it's not. And I think there were so many times early on in my career where I just considered certain things not working the way that I wanted them to failures. But most of the time on the end of that failure came something that was so much cooler than I could have ever imagined without it. And so I think I would just tell him to embrace the failure and learn from it.
Thank you so much, Thomas. This was amazing.
Yeah, likewise. I never get to talk about this stuff, so I'm much appreciative that you led that so well. So thank you very much.